Hi folks, and welcome back to Fishing with Den. Well, looks like we're back to making floats again today. The weather outside's awful, it's raining, it's windy, and it's really miserable. So, float it is, and what we're going to be doing this time is we're going to be making loaded bodied wagglers. Now, wagglers you probably already know about. That's the body, which is made of balsa. That's the loading, which is lead, and they're going to have inserted tips, which I've shown you on other things, which you can just put in. So you can have a long, thin one. You can have a more buoyant one, different colours, or you could have a really buoyant one. So that way you can cope with all light conditions, and all forms of undertow and so on. Now this is one I made some time ago. It's exactly the same as the ones I'm going to make you today. But of course, there are times when you lose these things. I've put them up trees, I've gone into beds of rushes, I've been broken off by carp, and so it's time I made some more. So as you can see, I've already made up one set of these floats. I've made 3 grams, 4 grams, 5 grams, 7 grams, and 9 grams. Now, you can see obviously that going up to 3, 4 and 5 is logical, but you're probably wondering why between 5 and 7 and 7 and 9 I've skipped a gram in between. And that's purely because once you get to these bigger sizes here, 1 gram doesn't make that much difference. It's better just to step up by 2 grams to get to where you need to be. Materials wise, I'm going to be using this round balsa, which you can buy in DIY stores, or if you can't get them at the local DIY store, go to a model shop and they'll do round balsa dowel for you. Now I'm going to be using this one, which is at 12.5 millimeters or about half an inch. And I'll also be, for these bigger floats, using this one here, which is the 16 millimeter version of it. One other thing to be aware of is to make sure that these things are perfectly round. So look down at the end of it to make sure it is. Now I know they don't cut them this way, but it's as if they'd cut them down the middle and then glued them back together, and they glued them slightly off centre, and so you end up with a ridge at either side, and that's no good for when you want to be able to create the centre point in there. So have a look at the ends, make sure they do look very, very round to you. The other things we're going to need is a bag of these things, which is just the very thin bamboo skewers that you use for barbecues, for kebabs and stuff. You're going to need some of these lead weights. Now, I've seen them called barrel leads, I've seen them called bean sinkers. Basically, it's just a piece of lead with a hole down the middle. And I'm going to use 2 sizes. This is the 4 gram, these are 7 grams, and they're going to be cut down to suit the floats. The only other thing you're going to use is my favourite pens, these gel pens, and again, as I've said in previous videos, make sure you get the gel pens and make sure you get the pastel version, because what you do is you take out the little ink tube, run it under a tap, and the gel will actually run away. But more importantly, the diameter suits the barbecue skewers here, and you just put them in, and that's how you form the hole for these inserts. As far as the inserts go, we're going to be making these as well. These are thick ones, and I will be using some of this balsa wood here, and this one is the 6.5 millimeter. For the middle-sized inserts, again, we'll be using some of these plastic inserts, and for the thin ones, like these, we're going to be using just the standard bamboo skewers. So that pretty much covers the basics of what you need. But one quick word of warning for the people in the UK, you may not be able to get hold of this kind of lead weight. Many of you are probably already aware that back in 1986, the government banned lead shot in certain sizes between a number 8 and 1 ounce. And so that's why most of the weights today are made out of tungsten or similar materials. Having said that, I've looked at the legislation, and I will put a link down below in the description box for you. I did see something in there which said that that doesn't apply to weights which are incorporated into floats. Decide for yourself. I've put the link, as I say, down in the box. If you feel that you're not comfortable with using these things, then you may need to consider a different option. One of which might be to get some brass rod at say 3mm and insert that into the bottom of the float. Really, for anybody else, it probably isn't going to be a problem. Certainly in Australia and America, they should be freely available, but check your local regulations just to make sure. Where I am, these are perfectly legal, so that's what we're going to use today. So the first thing we've got to do then is to cut the bodies to size. Now, as you can see, I've pre-cut these bodies, and I'm making 3 sets of each size of float. To cut it, you can use one of these, you can use a hacksaw, or as I did, you can do it on the table saw. But try to make sure they're all exactly the same length. Now, with regard to length, this first float is made out of the 12mm diameter balsa, and the length of the body is 45mm. The next one is 50mm, again in the 12mm, and then 55mm once more in the 12.5mm. Then we step up to the larger float and we go to the 16mm, but the actual length of this is exactly the same at 55mm. The final one, again at 16mm diameter, these are at 65mm. So the next thing we've got to do is to find the centre of each of these pieces of balsa wood and then drill the holes to accommodate the little spike that goes in and holds the lead weight, and also for the tube at the top. Try to get the hole as near as possible to the centre of the balsa. If you were to drill a hole over here, this thing would be off centre and they would therefore wobble around and it wouldn't work too well as a float. So obviously you can try and gauge that yourself, or you can make yourself one of these, which is a dowel centre finder. Sounds very posh and elaborate, but basically it's 2 pieces of plywood and a piece of aluminium. Now, I have done a little video on how to make one of these things, so I'll put that up at the same time as I post this video today. Now, let's show you how this works. Put your balsa in there, and then just scribe up, move it around, do it again, and move it around and do it again. And then if you've done it right, you'll end up with that. And that's the centre of the balsa. Very straightforward, very simple. Okay, so we're all marked up and we're ready to go. Now, I'm quite lucky because I've made myself this lathe out of an old drill, and I've fitted it with this 2mm drill bit. Now, what I generally do is just make a little depression in where I've put the mark, slot it in here. Now, I probably wouldn't need to do this, but I'll be coming back to this in a second for you to show you how to do yours. Now, for mine, all I've got to do is turn it on, push it through, and there we go. Now, obviously, you haven't got one of these, have you? I can now repeat drill on all of the other bodies and do this very quickly. But you need to find a way to actually achieve this yourself. So, let's give you some pointers. So the first thing is, don't just take a standard battery operated screwdriver, put a 2mm drill bit in it, and then try and drill through the centre. You will actually end up doing this and it'll come out off centre at the other end. The idea is to try and secure this down to the bench somehow. Now, I found the easiest way to secure the battery operated drill screwdriver is just to take a clamp and clamp it in a position so it's parallel to the bench here. Take off the battery pack for now, and then you'll be putting on either tape or a cable tie or something to hold the trigger in position. Then when you put this back on, it'll start up. Now, as you can see, I've also taken a couple of pieces of scrap wood so that they're just fractionally lower than halfway. And what I'm going to do is offer that up. Now, obviously I'm doing this all backwards here, but the point of the drill goes into the center, and now I can actually gauge roughly where I am in terms of keeping this parallel. So I can take it into the drill, then take it back the other way and drill from the other side. Never try and drill all the way through, because that's going to mean it comes out slightly offset here. Obviously this is just a piece of scrap, but really this will give you quite a good result. Well, that's all the holes drilled, and so now I'm going to do the shaping. Again, I'm lucky because I've got my little lathe thing here. I've taken off the tailstock, but really all I've done is taken one of the fairly straight bamboo skewers, put it through the body of the first float, and then I'm going to fashion the body of the float using just this strip of sandpaper. Now for you, obviously, as I said before, you don't have one of these, so put it in a vise or go back to the method I showed you before, so you can hold on to it, hold on to the stick rather, and you can actually then perform a very good job of shaping. For me, if I turn this on, always hold here so it doesn't wobble around too much, and then just gently shape the float. And there we are, that's the first body done. Now, I don't worry too much about taking floats down to this kind of shape. This is often what you'll see in the shops, either this way up or the body reversed, so it's the taper at the top. The problem you've got is that you're not mass producing these things, and so the more you take out in the taper, the more inaccurate it's going to be when you're trying to make replicants of the float you're making now. So all I do is I just round off the top, round off the other end, and leave it at that. Now, if you're worried about aerodynamics, don't worry, these things work just fine. And it's just a simple way of doing things. Now, I don't need a float which looks like a work of art. I need something which just works, frankly. It needs to be waterproof, it needs to be stable, it needs to be aerodynamic, and it just needs to do the job. So I suppose the only thing left now is to do the other 14 of them, eh? Well, that's the float bodies all sanded to shape. Just a word of warning on the safety side of things, make sure you wear a mask. These things do generate quite a lot of very, very fine dust, and of course that could have an adverse effect on your lungs. As far as the floats themselves are concerned, as I said, I drilled a 2mm hole through to accept the bamboo, and that made it a very tight fit on the bamboo. That way, when the bamboo is rotating, this would continue to rotate with it. If you make it too loose a fit, then this will stop spinning and cause you a problem. Further up the range, however, when I got up to this area, I found a 2mm hole. Didn't allow me to push this thing through the body too easily. And so what I did, I drilled a 2.5mm hole. And of course, then this was slipping all over the place. And the remedy for that is to simply take the bamboo part, just dunk this section into water, obviously without the body on, then push the body on. What that means is that the bamboo skewer swells up slightly, and when it gets up inside the balsa, that also swells up, and that keeps this nice and secure whilst you're doing the sanding. So now with the bodies all shaped up, what we need to do is to just cut this off here, which I'll do in a moment, and fit these plastic tubes in their place. Now before we can fit them, we have to just rub down the outsides, because this shiny coating doesn't help when you're trying to paint them. Just rough them up a little bit with some sandpaper. You'll know when they're right, because instead of being see-through, they'll become opaque. And I've got to do 15 of these, so back in a few minutes. It doesn't take all that long, just got to rough up the outside so you get a good key for the paint and any glue. So, with those all done, I've now got to glue these bamboo sticks into the hollow tube here. And there's a bit of a trick to this to make it stick. As I mentioned a minute ago, we roughed up the outside to make sure that the glue and the paint adhered, but we still need to do something with the inside. And what you do there is you take a drill which just fits snugly inside the tube. As you see, it's a bit of a sliding fit, but it's not too loose and not too tight. And all you do go a couple of centimetres up inside it, and what we're trying to do is to rough up the inside. Having done that, you can now use araldite glue. I use the 5-minute stuff, and just glue your stick in. Take your float body, put it in, and there we go. So that's pretty much most of the body done. We will be cutting this down a little later on, and remember, don't rough up the inside of this end, because that's where you're going to be inserting your tips up here, just like so. And you don't want that to be too rough, because you do want that to slide out. I'll be chopping this off as well in a moment, but first of all I'm going to glue all the other ones together. All the sticks are glued into the tubes now, so the last thing to do today is to just put a little dab of araldite on here, push the body up, and then just clear off any excess. You don't need much glue for this. All I'm going to do is just smear a bit on there, then push up till it's done. Then either take a finger or a piece of tissue and just wipe off the excess. That's it. In a minute I'll cut these off at this point here, but while the glue is still fresh, I'm just going to carry on putting little dabs on and gluing up. Well, as you can see, we're now starting to get to a point where we're getting things that look like floats. I've chopped off the bamboo at the bottom here. I've given it 2.5 centimetres. Only has to be rough at the moment. We're going to be addressing that in the next episode because of course I've done enough for one day, and this is where we finish in this episode. In the next episode then, the final one, what we'll be doing is fitting the lead weights onto here, fitting an eye on the bottom, painting up, and making those tip inserts in different colours and different sizes. So as usual, hope you enjoyed it. If you did, click the like button. If you want to subscribe, you can do that too. And until the next time, bye for now.